Thanks for tuning in to the Football Game Tonight podcast. I'm your host, John Kuzma. This is the place for all your latest NFL news and action. So if you're looking for updates from around the league, you've come to the right place. We have another great show coming up for you guys today. On the ticker, we're going to talk about Jalen Hurts and whether or not he's being carried by the Eagles. We're going to talk about whether the Lions can overcome the loss of their two offensive coordinators. We're going to do the J.J. McCarthy story and how he'll do with the Vikings. We'll talk about, Matthew Stafford, how worried the Rams should be with Matthew Stafford and his back injury. Then we'll finish this episode off with the Giants defensive line. I think that Giants defensive line is looking really good. So let's start with the headline story. Is Jalen Hurts being carried by the Eagles? So a lot of people seem to think that Jalen Hurts is being carried, and I don't know if that's the case with Jalen Hurts at all, because I look at what he did in those two Super Bowl appearances, and I know they lost that first Super Bowl, the Eagles, with Jalen Hurts, but you can make a case that he was the best player on the field that night. He took his game up a notch. He elevated his game and put the team on his back and did everything he possibly could to get the Eagles to win that game. Now, the team came up short in that game, but, Jalen Hurts was more than good in that game. He was just flat out outstanding. So I can't sit here and say that Jalen Hurts is being carried. Then obviously in this latest Super Bowl, the Eagles just absolutely blow out the Chiefs in that game. So to me, it's like you look at the two Super Bowl appearances for Jalen Hurts. He wasn't the reason they lost that first game, and he's been spectacular in both games. You have to step up on the biggest stages if you want to be a great player in the National Football League. Obviously, Jalen Hurts has shown he's more than capable of doing that. We've seen him in the biggest stage in the sport twice, the Super Bowl, where everybody in the whole world is watching that game. Did Jalen Hurts shrink in those environments? No, he actually got better. So to me, is he surrounded by talent? Sure. But the guy is clearly good enough to get the job done. I think there's something else, with his ability to rally the troops and inspire the guys around him, that you have to give him credit for what he's able to bring to the table for that Eagles team. Sure, at times he can be limited as a passer. Maybe you want a guy with a little bit more arm talent, but there's so many players around the league that are super talented that just don't motivate their teammates the way that Jalen Hurts does. Let's not forget that either. I look at a guy like Justin Herbert, who has all the talent in the world, but you have to wonder if he's getting it done from a leadership perspective. I don't think we have those questions about Jalen Hurts at all. You might be able to say, hey, Jalen Hurts needs to have more arm talent like Justin Herbert does, but he doesn't have those leadership problems that Justin Herbert has. I think Justin Herbert has to do a better job at inspiring his teammates, at motivating the people around him, at making the other players on that team better. Those are the intangibles that Jalen Hurts gets right. He makes everybody around him better, which has been great for the Eagles team. And the Eagles are loaded with talent. And in some ways, Jalen Hurts is a little bit propped up just because they do have, A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. And, they have Saquon Barkley. So they have all these playmakers, a really good offensive line. They're stacked offensively from top to bottom. But I just feel like, the nuclear reactor at the middle of all that is Jalen Hurts. And some people might say, well, it's Saquon Barkley. This past year with this Eagles team that won the Super Bowl, Saquon Barkley was, a guy that was part of, the nuclear reactor for this Eagles team. But remember, this Eagles team got to a Super Bowl and was really close without Saquon Barkley. And it was Jalen Hurts in that game who really stepped up. It was the other guys in that locker room, the other 52 guys that didn't, play their best football and get the job done. I remember in that game, we were going into that game thinking that the Eagles defense was going to be too much for the Chiefs in that first Super Bowl that they met up in. And the Chiefs offense actually came out and won that matchup against the Eagles defense. So that was really the reason why I think that Super Bowl didn't go their way the first time. But remember, Jalen Hurts was just unstoppable. He dominated that game from start to finish, was unstoppable. And in this last win, the team as a whole was much better in the Super Bowl rematch against the Chiefs, where they just, blew the Chiefs out. The Chiefs couldn't even get anything going because the Eagles are so deep on both sides of the ball now. They got a lot younger this time around. Remember, Howie Roseman hit on a lot of those draft picks, and a lot of those young draft picks are, key factors for that Eagles team, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Whereas in that first Super Bowl, they were a little bit older. Remember, Ndamukong Suh signed like halfway through the season. Brandon Graham, I think Fletcher Cox was still there. So they were definitely a lot older on the defensive side of the ball in that first Super Bowl. In this latest Super Bowl this past year, they were much younger, and it showed on the field because they had more energy, and the Chiefs were just outgunned in that game. They couldn't keep up. So, to me, a little bit he gets carried, a little bit just because there's so much talent on this team and there's so many playmakers. But I just can't, commit to saying he's really being carried. Like, it's just not fair to say. Maybe he's slightly propped up because of how much talent they have, but I just can't come to grips with saying he's being carried by this team just because how good he played in those two Super Bowls. I just think a guy that was being carried would no-show in those Super Bowls, which obviously he didn't do. He was just stellar in both those Super Bowls. Biggest stage against, the best team. If you're playing against the Chiefs, we all know the Chiefs were a dynasty. And if the Eagles are playing in the final game of the season, they're playing against a team that also made it to the Super Bowl as well. So that level of competition is on a totally different level than what you see in the regular season. Playing the Chiefs in the Super Bowl is different than a Week 8 matchup against the Titans. So for Jalen Hurts to play the way he did in those two Super Bowls, despite the loss in the first one, I just think, what he means to that team, it means so much, and they feed off Jalen Hurts. You can't tell me they don't feed off Jalen Hurts. I've even seen Jalen Hurts reel in Nick Sirianni and try to make sure his head is in the game. And I like Nick Sirianni as a coach. I remember when a lot of people were saying, this guy can't coach. I was like, there's something there. There's something there. And then even this past year, I know they won the Super Bowl, but remember when they were really banged up with injuries at the beginning of the season and people were saying Nick Sirianni is going to get fired? Nobody talked about the fact that they were dealing with a bunch of injuries. A.J. Brown was a little banged up. I think Devontae Smith was banged up. So when you're dealing with those key injuries, yeah, you're going to take a hit, especially in the wins and loss columns, because you're missing your playmakers, you're missing your superstars, so to say, and it's going to affect you in the NFL, a hyper competitive league. Nick Sirianni was on the hot seat when those injuries happened, and people were wondering if he's the right guy for the job. Fast forward, they get everybody back. They go on to win the Super Bowl. Critics are silent. So obviously Nick Sirianni is the right guy for the job. He's taken this team to 2 Super Bowls. He's won one of them. And this team is, they're looking at going back to another Super Bowl. They're still going to be very competitive. And people are saying, can this team pick up where they left off? How can they stay competitive and be in the hunt for another Super Bowl going back to back? I think the biggest challenge for this Eagles team is complacency. Because when you get to the mountaintop and you win that Super Bowl and you have that Super Bowl parade, it's easy to take your foot off the gas a little bit. It's easy to not go as hard in practice. It's easy to think, okay, we made it. We're accomplished now. We don't have to go as hard because we expect success. You got to throw that out and you got to start from scratch and say we have to earn it all over again. That's the challenge for this Eagles team because they already punched their ticket. They can't just expect to get those same results. It's got to be earned. It's got to be earned in practice. It's got to be earned rep by rep. Then they got to go out there, have success in the regular season. After that, it's back to the grind in the postseason. There's not a single rep that you can take off if you're the Eagles. And in fact, it's the opposite. Now they have a target on their back. People are going to load the box against Saquon Barkley. People are going to draw up new coverages to contain A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith. People are going to find a way, to bring exotic blitzes and put pressure on Jalen Hurts and try to get him to throw into disguise coverages. Those are the things that they have to realize. And when I say the Eagles have to realize that they're going to get everybody's best shot. Everybody's gunning for them. They want to knock the Eagles off. So complacency is the big challenge for this Eagles team. Are they still hungry? Are they still the hungry dog? Are they still the team that, is motivated to win another one? Or are they just happy with, they got another one? Because remember, this team won one with Doug Peterson and Nick Foles, and then, they win this last year with Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley. Do they feel like, hey, Nick Foles and Doug Peterson won one, and that was good enough for them? I think this Eagles team now is too talented to say, hey, Doug Peterson and Nick Foles won one. We won one too. That's good enough. They're too talented. I think this Eagles team is more talented than that Eagles team. I think with the weapons they have, with the addition of Saquon Barkley, I think this last year's Eagles team would beat up on Nick Foles, Carson Wentz, Doug Peterson, and the rest of those guys. I just do. And maybe I'm wrong on that, but I just, in my gut, I don't think I am. I just think they're loaded with talent right now. I think they got the right young pieces, all those draft picks that they've hit on, Jordan Davis, the rest of the guys, Cooper DeJean, the rest of the guys they have. I mean, it is what it is, man. They're loaded with talent. Moving on, though, let's do the second story that we have. Will the Lions overcome the loss of both of their coordinators? Now, don't get me wrong, losing Ben Johnson and losing Aaron Glenn is a blow for the Lions team, but it's not going to stop this Lions team. And let me tell you why. This Lions team is so loaded with talent that you can plug in the next guy up at the offensive coordinator and the defensive coordinator position and still have success because the players on the field are so good that you're not going to be able to contain them. There's a reason this team is one of the more high-powered offenses in the league. There's a reason that, Jamison Williams always breaks free and goes deep on top of you. There's a reason that Amon-Ra St. Brown is a guy that you can count on for a whole bunch of production. There's a reason Jared Goff has came to this team and hit the ground running. It's because all these pieces have blended together perfectly to make the most high-powered offense in the NFL right now. These guys can pour it on teams. They can pour it on teams. And when it comes to scoring points, they're the best team in the league right now. So to think that, losing Ben Johnson and he goes to the Bears, he's on an NFC North rival now, and, Aaron Glenn's with the Jets, this thing's going to fall apart. I just disagree. And some people are like, well, Dan Campbell's a great motivator. Yes, he is. But I actually am leaning towards the players over Dan Campbell, why this thing will work out for the Lions. Yeah, Dan Campbell can motivate. Yeah, he can connect with his players. Yeah, he's great at setting the tone. But that's not why this Lions team's going to pick up right where they left off. This Lions team's going to pick up right where they left off because they're stacked. That roster is stacked. They're loaded with talent. They have playmakers all over the field. There's so many different ways this team can beat you. They have two really good running backs in Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. They bring totally different styles. You got the lightning speedster and Jahmyr Gibbs, who can turn the corner, go down the sideline to the house for those 80-yard runs. And then you have a punishing bruiser in David Montgomery that makes guys not want to tackle him once the second half of those games roll around. And when you put them together, it's hard to game plan for both of them. They can work the play action because of those running backs. They're loaded. They're loaded. And there's just too much there for this team to drop off just because Ben Johnson's not there. Even if the next offensive coordinator wasn't great, the Lions players would take it upon themselves to set the tone themselves, and they would figure out another offensive coordinator to plug in there. They would just get rid of that guy and bring someone else in. There's got to be an offensive assistant or some offensive quality control analyst or somebody that can draw up plays. And we've even seen Dan Campbell take over play calling at times for this team, especially his first year when they were struggling. I think he took over play calling for, who was it, Anthony Lynn? So, yeah, I'm not worried at all. And look at Ben Johnson over there with the Bears right now. It's not going great. The Bears are not executing well at training camp. So is it Ben Johnson's brilliance, or is it the fact that this team's loaded with talent? You know, when you have a stacked offensive line, a really good quarterback, and playmakers all over the field, no matter what you call, kind of goes your way because the guys on the field execute just so damn good. And it makes you look like a genius. And who I'm talking about is Ben Johnson. It made him look like a genius because the players on the field and the personnel was just better than the defenses that they were going against. So now Ben Johnson goes over to the Bears, an NFC North rival, and nothing's clicking for that team. Well, guess what? That team over there, the Bears, offensively, throughout the history of the NFL, might be the worst offensive team in the history of the NFL. They've always historically struggled on the offensive side of the ball, and nothing they do can get it figured out. So now Ben Johnson, nothing's working for him, and some of the players are frustrated with him. Well, guess what? You had it pretty good with the Lions, where that offensive line mauled anybody they lined up across, where those two running backs imposed their will on those linebackers, either with power, with David Montgomery, or with the speed and being able to juke you out of your shoes with Jahmyr Gibbs. And nobody can check Amon-Ra St. Brown. Jameson Williams is one of the best vertical threats in the whole entire league. You look at like a guy like Tyreek Hill. Jameson Williams can do some Tyreek Hill stuff. Now, he's not as dominant as Tyreek Hill yet, but, he's starting to mature and get older. He had some off-the-field issues, but he's made progress on the field and has had growth as a player. And we've seen him be able to take the top off the defense, to use a Randy Moss quote. So, to me, it's like these weapons, you lost Frank Ragnow at the center position, but I still think there's enough there where they can make it work. And I still think they're the most high-powered offense in the NFL. Remember, the Chiefs have a really good offense too, with, Andy Reid calling the plays, Patrick Mahomes executing everything, Travis Kelce, the rest of the guys they have there. The past couple of years, at least in the regular season, this Lions team offensively has been better than the Chiefs. They've piled it on when it comes to punching it in the end zone, with putting points on the board, with being a scoring offense. Those are the things they do well. They air it out. They're a two-way offense, and what I mean by that is they can throw the ball and they can run the ball. They win at the line of scrimmage with their offensive line. When you check all those boxes, it's not a fluke when you're the highest scoring offense in the NFL. It's not a fluke because you're dominating on the offensive side of the ball at so many different positions. And the separation the receivers can get, the rhythm and timing that Jared Goff has developed with Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams. Last year they brought in Tim Patrick. I mean, come on. It's not a fluke. They were scoring so many points and pouring it on because they have the personnel to execute. That's what I'm trying to get through to you guys. So, as good as Dan Campbell is, losing Ben Johnson on the offensive side of the ball doesn't completely doom this team at all because they're so good player-wise. And then on the defense side of the ball, the best news the Lions really could have gotten on the defensive side of the ball is Aiden Hutchinson looks like his old self, because when you have that kind of injury, a lot of guys never get back to what they once were. And that doesn't seem to be the case with Aiden Hutchinson. It sounds like he's going to be the same player that he was this past year. Remember how good he was before he got injured. It looked like he was on a path to be the defensive player of the year. That's how much he was dominating for that Lions defense. So the fact that he's going to be able to get back on track and dominate like he did a year ago, and his health has really come along perfectly. It's been a perfect recovery for Aiden Hutchinson. That's the best news the Lions could have gotten on the defense side of the ball, because without him, we saw what happened to the Lions defense in the playoffs. There were so many injuries, so many guys were banged up that they were just pulling guys out of the stands and trying to get them to play on the defense side of the ball. With Aiden Hutchinson back, they're always going to be able to get a pass rush. So now when the Commanders come to the town in the playoffs like they did this past year, now Jaden Daniels has to look over his shoulder because Aiden Hutchinson is there trying to take his head off. That's how you strike fear into the opposing offense, with your defense. That's how you do it with a guy like Aiden Hutchinson, who is coming around that corner, bending, and then putting a massive hit on the quarterback. That's what he does. So I like everything the Lions have going for them. I love their personnel on offense. Aiden Hutchinson is going to be healthy this upcoming season, and it doesn't sound like he's missing a step or lost a step, I should say. In fact, he's been very disruptive in camp to the point where he has to pull up and let the offense throw the ball. Otherwise, the offense won't get any reps. So what's that tell you? It's the same old Aiden Hutchinson. So that's why, Ben Johnson's gone. Aaron Glenn's gone. But the Lions will be just fine. Moving on. Can J.J. McCarthy pick up the slack for the Vikings? Sam Darnold is out. J.J. McCarthy is in. And now the Vikings are wondering, can J.J. McCarthy conduct this offense? Can he do what Sam Darnold did for this Vikings team last year? J.J. McCarthy will be the exact opposite of Sam Darnold. And I'm going to tell you why it will be a good thing for the Vikings. Now, hear me out on this. Who is Sam Darnold, or who was Sam Darnold last year for the Vikings, I should ask? Sam Darnold was a guy that was really good in the regular season, lit it up in the regular season, was playing lights out in the regular season. But once they got into those, top tier matchups, the game against the Lions, the playoffs, Sam Darnold was not the same player. Late in the season, he was not the same player. It just, as good as he was, it was regular season success. It wasn't, success in those top tier matchups. It wasn't, when you're playing against those better teams late in the year, it's a lot harder. It's a lot tougher. That's why I have to praise Jalen Hurts for being so good in the Super Bowl. Well, with Sam Darnold, he caved in those moments. This is why J.J. McCarthy is going to be the exact opposite. J.J. McCarthy, because it's his first year as a starter of the Vikings, he's going to take his licks in the regular season with the Vikings. He's going to take his licks. He's going to have some tough moments. It's going to be rough at times out of the gate. But one thing I know about J.J. McCarthy, and I know this very well because I'm a Michigan Wolverines fan, J.J. McCarthy gets better when the pressure is on. So stop and think about Sam Darnold. Great in the regular season. When the pressure was on, he caved. J.J. McCarthy is going to be the opposite. He's going to struggle because it's his first year. A year from now, 2 years from now, he's going to be way smoother in the regular season because he's going to have his feet under him. He's going to have his confidence build up. But this first year, he's going to have a learning curve. He's going to struggle at times, and people are going to question him at times. But once it gets to those moments where the going gets tough, J.J. McCarthy is going to get better, and he's going to turn some heads. He's going to impress a lot of people. I guarantee it, because I think about that national championship run with Michigan. All those moments where the Wolverines had their backs against the wall, J.J. McCarthy stepped up every single time. I think about the Alabama game when Alabama was battling against the Wolverines. J.J. McCarthy stepped up, led them down the field on a drive, punched it in, and the Wolverines eventually would go on to win that game. The pressure was on. J.J. McCarthy got better. So, to me, I think J.J. McCarthy eventually, after taking his licks, after having a learning curve and, people doubting him, eventually near that second half of the season, he's going to start gaining his confidence. He's going to start realizing, okay, I can play in this league. The game will start to slow down for him. Then you'll see him in those high-stakes moments start to seize his opportunity. He's going to be true to J.J. McCarthy because that's who he is. And, as impressive as Sam Darnold was throwing the ball all over the place, I just feel like if you cave or you shrink in those big moments, it's all for nothing. And I think J.J. McCarthy is going to be the opposite. I think he's going to really step up in those big moments. And I think that's exactly what the Vikings need to take that next step. Who cares about the regular season? As long as you get in the playoffs, that's all that matters, But if you light it up in the regular season and then you don't do anything in the playoffs, then it's all for nothing. All J.J. McCarthy has to do is, even if he gets the Vikings to limp in the playoffs, they limp in the playoffs where they're just a wild card and they're the last team that makes it. If he can just get them into the playoffs and then he has this clutch gene that takes over when the pressure's on, to me, that's going to end up being better than Sam Darnold because at least you have a guy against elite competition. He gets better. He gets better, and everybody in that locker room, everybody on that team starts to believe, okay, we can win with this guy, and we can win when it matters the most. Belief is an incredible thing. When everybody in that locker room, the coaching staff, the owners, from the press box all the way down to the locker room, knows that they got something special with this young quarterback in J.J. McCarthy because, when it's, crunch time in the playoffs, he starts getting better, people recognize people start looking at each other on the sidelines like, hey, this kid can play. We might have something here. And I think he's going to be able to eventually really do some damage with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. And I think that system that they have there with the Vikings, they have a really good offensive system. It's a system that is conducive for success. It's a system where a guy gets a lot of help, and that leads to positive results. So eventually when J.J. McCarthy figures it out, he's primed and ready to go. He's in a system that caters to him, a system that's going to bring the best out of him, and it gives him a shot to really compete in the National Football League at the highest levels. For a Super Bowl, in the playoffs when it matters the most. So you couldn't ask for a better situation for J.J. McCarthy, and like I said, there's something special about this kid. He's got an X factor to him. He's got a clutch gene in him. He's got the it factor. And, people might be concerned about, what's going on in training camp. Why is it not going well in these practices? Well, it's his first year as a starter. He's also coming off an injury. He's supposed to be, he's supposed to play last year. It was supposed to be his rookie year last year. He gets injured and misses the whole year. He's coming off an injury. It's his first whole year as a starter. He's the guy now. There's going to be wrinkles you have to iron out. That goes for even veterans, but especially a young guy that's still trying to learn the ropes at the National Football League, in the National Football League, I should say. So I wouldn't panic if I'm Vikings fans, and I think you guys are actually going to be in really good hands. Moving on. Should the Rams be worried about Matthew Stafford? Now, when it comes to Matthew Stafford, I think even after all these years, I still think he's one of the most underrated quarterbacks in the league. When we do these quarterback lists, he's always further down the list than he should be. Every single time. You see him at like 7 or 6. It's like, are you sure about that? Because when I watch Matthew Stafford play, there's not many quarterbacks in this league that are better than him. There's not. The guy is throwing lasers all over the field. His arm strength is just off the charts. He's precise. His accuracy is incredible. He's smart up top, so he can diagnose anything you throw at him. He's a tough guy. He's a leader. And I just never felt like he got the respect that he deserves when it comes to the quarterback position in the NFL. Every time you see a ranking, he's too low. Every single time. So from that standpoint, the Rams have to be concerned. And don't get me wrong, they have Jimmy Garoppolo. And Jimmy Garoppolo won a lot of games with the 49ers. Remember, the 49ers didn't turn the corner until Jimmy Garoppolo got there. They traded for him from the Patriots. They went to the Patriots and got Jimmy Garoppolo from the Patriots, brought him back to San Francisco, and then suddenly San Francisco, the 49ers, became a winning program. And they're what the 49ers that we know now are. They were not winning games until Jimmy Garoppolo got there and put his stamp on that team. So Jimmy Garoppolo is more than capable of stepping in and winning games for this Rams team until Matthew Stafford gets back. And Jimmy Garoppolo has won a lot of games in this league. He's been a starting quarterback. He's been a franchise quarterback for the 49ers. Remember, went to a Super Bowl with the 49ers. So, to me, it's like he's more than capable of carrying the torch until Matthew Stafford gets back. But at the same time, it's never really possible to replace Matthew Stafford just because the things he does well, he does them so much better than everybody else. You can't replicate Matthew Stafford's arm strength. You can't replicate his ability to throw the football in any window on the field, whether it's deep down the middle, near the sidelines, an out route over the middle. There's no throw on the field that Matthew Stafford can't make. Now, Jimmy Garoppolo gets it done a little differently. He's a lot of rhythm and timing, a lot of almost like pre-snap, predetermined throws with Jimmy Garoppolo, whereas Matthew Stafford's just so talented that he can just improvise on the fly and make things happen. I think things had to be a little bit more structured with Jimmy Garoppolo, and you have to design things a little bit more with Jimmy Garoppolo just so you kind of help him have success. But, obviously Jimmy Garoppolo has been to a Super Bowl and has had a lot of success. But you just get to play so freely with Matthew Stafford. You can call anything. He knows every single play. He can improvise. If it's a play to the Z receiver over on the right and he sees that the X receiver on the far left has a step or two on the corner over on the left side of the field, yeah, it's a play to the Z to the right, but he's throwing deep over top to the X. Jimmy Garoppolo, if it's a play to the Z, he might go to the tight end on the right side, but, it's almost like, remember those Madden games where you have like a QB vision? Jimmy Garoppolo, if he's looking to the right, he's probably going to the right side of the field. Maybe it's not to the out route to the Z, but maybe it's a seam route to the tight end on the right side of the field. Matthew Stafford is so good, he can look to the right, say, no, I need to go back to the left because I think my guy has a step on the corner there. He can work back from his first read at the Z out route, look all the way back left, and then have enough arm talent and enough arm strength to really just let it fly over top downfield to his receiver. Jimmy Garoppolo is not going to do that as much. He's going to stay on that right side of the field. So that's the difference between those two quarterbacks. Matthew Stafford just has something that you can't coach. Jimmy Garoppolo is a smart guy. He can understand the system. He can work within the system. Matthew Stafford is the system. Do you know what I mean? He's bigger than the system. A system quarterback has to be, kind of within the game plan. Matthew Stafford, you just go out there and let him be a gunslinger because that's who he is, and he's going to win you games just because defenses can't game plan for his talent. He's too talented. He's got too much zip on his throws. It just puts the defense at too much of a disadvantage because if there's any window at all, Matthew Stafford is going to find it. Jimmy Garoppolo doesn't have that kind of throw power. He's not going to be able to hit those windows as much. Jimmy Garoppolo likes to throw over the middle a lot. He really loves to work the middle of the field. But is Jimmy Garoppolo going to stretch the field vertically like Matthew Stafford does? Absolutely not. He doesn't have the arm strength that Matthew Stafford has. Matthew Stafford, you have to be able to defend the field, especially deep. So now you have to be in deeper coverages, more cover 3, more cover 4. You're more reluctant to play a cover 0 or a cover 1. Even a cover 2 at times with Matthew Stafford, you can get burned on because do you only want 2 guys deep with Matthew Stafford throwing the ball? I don't. I want at least 3 guys deep every single time. Now with Jimmy Garoppolo, you can probably get away with 2 guys deep, a cover 2, 2 high safeties. With Matthew Stafford, you have to have at least 3 guys deep most of the plays. Now you can throw something in there a little bit different to try to surprise Matthew Stafford. You can run a cover 1 once in a blue moon, have a free safety and everybody else manning up. But most of the time you want to cover 3 with 3 guys deep, and sometimes even quarters cover 4, just because you got to keep everything in front of you against Matthew Stafford, or he's gonna pick you apart. There's a reason that guy is a future Hall of Famer, and there's a reason that guy has poured it on like he has. And let's not forget, Matthew Stafford won a Super Bowl. Jimmy Garoppolo got to a Super Bowl and lost, with the 49ers. So, and don't forget, in that game, Rams versus the Bengals in the Super Bowl, the Rams were beat up. Remember, Odell Beckham Jr. got hurt, and they were so banged up at the wide receiver position, and Matthew Stafford still put the team on his back and found a way to win that game. Remember, Joe Burrow had weapons all over the field, but yet Matthew Stafford, with a depleted wide receiver core, still beat the Bengals in that Super Bowl. Matthew Stafford won a Super Bowl. Jimmy Garoppolo got to a Super Bowl and lost. So, yeah, the Rams have to be concerned just because it's Matthew Stafford, a guy that even after all the success is still underrated. And a back injury, you never want to have a back injury if you're a quarterback, because you got to be able to plant your feet. You got to drive and throw. Your back goes into everything. It goes into planting your feet. It goes into twisting your body when you're, going through with your release on your throw. It's hard to generate energy on your passes. It all goes back to kinetic energy. It's hard to generate that energy on your passes when you got a bad back and you're banged up. So to me, it's like you got to be concerned if you're the Rams. You're really hoping it's, something that Matthew Stafford can overcome, because with Matthew Stafford, you always have a shot to go all the way. And, with Jimmy Garoppolo, your percentages go down quite a bit. That's just the reality of the situation. Moving on, the last topic we have, I want to talk about this Giants defensive line. And when I think about Giants defensive line, I think about the Giants defensive line. I think about Michael Strahan. I think about Justin Tuck. I think about Matthias Kiwanuka. That great Giants defensive line that beat that undefeated Patriots team. Remember, the Patriots were undefeated in the regular season. They ran into that Giants great defensive line in the Super Bowl. Strahan, Tuck, Kiwanuka, just ballers on that defensive line. Ballers on that defensive line. And we all know what that defensive line went on to accomplish. They were Super Bowl champions. I look at this current Giants defensive line. Now, don't get me wrong. This current Giants team isn't as complete as that Giants team that won that Super Bowl against the Patriots, because that Giants team that won the Super Bowl against the Patriots, they had Eli Manning on that offense, Plaxico Burress. We all know how complete of a team that was. To win a Super Bowl, you got to be a complete team. Sure, that defensive line was the driving force, but they were a complete team, which is why they won the Super Bowl. This Giants team, this current Giants team, is not that complete. They're not as complete as that Giants team, but this defensive line is shades of that defensive line. Now, we got to give an edge to that defensive line that won a Super Bowl. And obviously Michael Strahan was the leader of that bunch, and we all know how dominant he was, how great he was. But I'm looking at the talent of this current Giants defensive line. Dexter Lawrence, Kayvon Thibodeau, Abdul Carter, and Brian Burns. Stop and think about that. The fact that we're mentioning this defensive line of this current Giants team with that Giants team that won that Super Bowl, an all-time great defense, the fact that we're mentioning this current Giants defensive line in the same breath as them is something you have to be very proud of if you're a Giants fan. You have to give the Giants front office a lot of credit for building this defensive line, because this is stacked. This is stacked. There's no other way to put it. They are loaded on this defensive front. And we all know how good Dexter Lawrence is. Just a guy that is unblockable. And I've heard Jason Kelsey rave about how good Dexter Lawrence is. He said early on in his career, he could kind of use a few tricks that he had up his sleeve to kind of slow Dexter Lawrence down. He said now there's no shot. There's no stopping Dexter Lawrence. He said, he could use experience and things he knew and kind of use leverage a little bit and kind of slow him down. Now he said, there's just nothing you can do. He said Dexter Lawrence is just such a physical specimen that he's going to beat you. And we all know how good that Eagles offensive line is, and they're afraid of Dexter Lawrence. One of the best offensive lines in the league, and they're afraid of Dexter Lawrence. Oh, yeah, by the way, Kayvon Thibodeau, super talented. Abdul Carter, what he's been doing in this camp is terrifying. That looks like a home run for this Giants defense. That was, from everything we're seeing in camp, that was the right pick for this Giants team because he looks like he's got superstar potential. And then you got Brian Burns, too. That you remember they traded for Brian Burns. They went to the Panthers, got Brian Burns. He's still there, too. They're loaded. They're loaded with talent. And, you can slide, you can slide left, you can slide right, you can do this, you can do that. You can get a little creative with your blocking up front, but there comes a point when you're outgunned. You're outgunned, and yeah, you have different schemes and strategies you can work with, but at some point, the other side is just collapsing the pocket so fast that it's like when Mike Tyson says, everybody has a game plan until you get punched in the mouth. Yeah, you have a game plan. Yeah, you're going to slide this way, that way. You're going to take the running back and chip the end, slide left, and the running back's going to chip the right end and blah, blah, blah. Well, guess what? It doesn't matter because every single one of your offensive linemen are getting blown up. So all that sliding and these different protections, it doesn't matter if the guy you got blocking for you on your offensive line is getting blown up by Dexter Lawrence, getting blown up by Abdul Carter, Kayvon Thibodeau, Brian Burns, and they're rotating. They have a rotation of guys. Feels a lot like the Strahan group. Feels a lot like Justin Tuck and Matthias Kiwanuka. I mean, time will tell. Time will tell. Maybe this Giants team isn't as complete as that old Giants team, but maybe this current D-line is just so stacked and loaded with talent, there's something special there. It's not impossible. When I look at the personnel that they have here, it's not impossible. And like I said, when you have Michael Strahan, I mean, come on, man. Michael Strahan is cut from a different cloth. But Dexter Lawrence, it's like, yeah, Michael Strahan is a Hall of Famer, an all-time great, but Dexter Lawrence, man, I mean, Dexter Lawrence takes over games. He's unblockable. And, oh, yeah, you have Kayvon Thibodeau, Abdul Carter, Brian Burns coming along for the ride, too. You're not going to be able to stop those guys. So, yeah, this team has to fill in other positions. I think about the offensive side of the ball. They still have to get better on the offensive side of the ball. But they have a foundation in place with this defensive line. This defensive line is going to be the heart and blood of this football team. You're not going to be able to run against them. There's not going to be any daylight. There's not going to be any running lanes. You're not going to run against these guys. It's going to be tough for these quarterbacks to drop back. They're not going to have any time to scan the field. So this is something that gives this Giants team a competitive advantage. It's going to tilt the odds in this Giants team's favor just a little bit, at least on the defense side of the ball. Now, like I said, they still got to get better on offense. They still have to, iron out the wrinkles and be able to make plays and put points on the board. But just having this defensive line, and I'm not looking at the season, I'm looking past the season. Next off season, free agency, the draft, next off season. now they can go in and be more free when it comes to filling in these other pieces because they have something they can hang their hat on. We hang our hat on having one of the best defensive lines in the league. That's the core identity of our team. So we got that side of the ball taken care of, at least up front. Or maybe they say, hey, this is what we do really well. We're going to add to it by getting a linebacker, getting a corner, or whatever. If it was me calling the shots, I still think their weakness is, the offensive side of the ball. I think they have a chance to dominate more so on the defense side of the ball than the offense side of the ball. So I might honestly go offense and try to figure that thing out. But sometimes you're better off, just saying, hey, we already have a dominant defensive line. Let's just add to it and just be a super dominant defense. And you take the thing you do best and you make it even better. So that's where you have to decide. Do we address our weakness or do we add to our strength? To me, I just feel like even if you have a great defense in the NFL, you have to be able to score points. You have to be able to score points, but the downside to that approach is sometimes you add a player, you pick a first-round pick in the draft, and he goes over to a mediocre offense, and it kind of diminishes the returns you get from that first-round wide receiver or whatever he is because he's on a mediocre offense, and they can't bring the best out of him. So that's the decision going forward for this Giants team. But they have something to hang their hat on. It's obviously the defensive front, the strength of this team. We'll see what they got to do. I don't know. I think I might risk it and say you go offense now because you at least have something figured out on defense, and you gotta be able to score points somehow. Who knows though? We'll see what the Giants do. I'm excited to see this defensive front play this upcoming season. I think they're going to be able to take opposing offenses out of the game. I think it's going to be too much to match up with for some of these teams. But you'll get a better indication of what direction this team has to go in this upcoming season when we see this team play. I'm certain they're going to be great on that defensive front. They're just too talented not to be unless they get hit with several injuries. But you have to look at the offense. Can the offense just be functioning? Can they generate something on the offense side of the ball? If not, you got to start thinking, okay, we got to figure out how to fix the offense because we have a really good defense. Or maybe the defense is so dominant that you just say, hey, we're going to keep loading up on that side of the ball. At least we're going to do one thing better than everybody else in the whole entire league. I'm John Kuzma. Thank you guys for tuning in. That's all I got for this latest episode of the Football Game Tonight podcast. You can check us out wherever podcasts are found. I'm John Kuzma. I'm signing off.